Good evening. This is Hartness, Samushonga, and welcome to my broadcast where I will be speaking on the phenomenon of occupational or workplace burnout. As you will hear, the subject of burnout is relevant for many people in our world today. Perhaps I should start by sharing with you my interest in the subject of burnout. I can say that all of the occupations that I've been involved in are actually cited in burnout research as risk occupations for burnout, which I will obviously define. In fact, one of my key objectives today is to actually define what is referred to in scholarly literature as burnout. Anyway, my work has largely evolved around helping people. So I can go back to my time working as a nurse, a frontline nurse. And at some point, I was actually working in a unit where people were being tested and being diagnosed with HIV. And back in the day, people's understanding of HIV, so it's like it was a death sentence. But the emotional distress that was involved in not the patients themselves, but also as healthcare workers, emotionally charging. So that's one of the things I've done. Then thereafter, spent lots of time in management, leadership and management responsibilities, predominantly in the healthcare environment. And the work of managers, like employer managers, like some who might be connected here, it does encompass dealing and supporting people. So also managing people's performance and competency issues may arise. Also behavioral issues when you deal with people. People are individuals, so things do happen as people live life. And when they are actually part of a workforce, then managers do get involved. Sometimes it involves in investigations into misconduct and situations that are emotionally charging, not only for the members of staff, but for the managers who are actually supporting them through that. So that also is some of the things that I've done. And outside of this, I've also been involved in supporting people in the capacity of a minister in Christian ministry. I mean, supporting people through difficult types of challenges and hardships like sickness, relationship breakdowns, bereavement, and so forth. So as somebody who has a health background, I'm reasonably conscious about preserving my own health and well-being. So when I started for my master's degree in theology, I actually did a dissertation where I looked at the issue of burnout. So today, my research interests in the disciplines of management and theology. They also encompass burnout. So I'm therefore involved in burnout research from a management / leadership and also a pastoral perspective within practical theology. So I have published in those areas on burnout in academic literature. I am actually at this point in time supporting one of my nieces, a young scholar who was actually a high school student, in turning her school project on burnout in UK independent schools into an academic paper. So pretty much involved in burnout. So I do have an interest in that subject. But today I want to, my objective, I've got 5 objectives in this presentation. The first one is to look at why talk about burnout. Why do we have to talk about burnout? And then the second thing we want to explore today is just a little bit into the history of the term itself. Where did it come from? And then I will define burnout. Some of you will appreciate that the phrase or term burnout is used very loosely and applied anyhow. But we want to go into the literature and just understand how it is defined. I'll give you a snapshot of burnout research, what has come out in burnout research, what is known about burnout, where I give you some highlights into some occupational research to put it into perspective, because when you talk about burnout, we're talking about real people. We're also talking about real people in real jobs. So that's a snapshot. And then fifth objective today is we are going to look at the contributors of burnout, the things that could lead to burnout. And finally, we want to talk about mitigating burnout. What can we do to reduce burnout? Let me talk a little bit about my approach in this presentation. Burnout has both a theoretical and a practical dimension. My intention, however, is not to give a strictly academic or scholarly presentation, as I'm aware that academics and scholars often come across as boring, particularly to a lay audience. By lay, I mean people who are not specialists or experts in an area. That reminds me, each time when I publish an academic paper, my brother Heath, he wants to read it. And when he's read it, sometimes he makes a joke out of it. He says, so Hartness, I've read the paper. Now, can you tell me what it says in English? So what he's trying to say is that it's too scientific. Of course, he understands it. He's just trying to be funny. So what I'm saying is that I'm quite conscious here that I need to strike a balance here. However, I will have to draw from burnout literature in order to base my presentation on research evidence so that you, the audience, will benefit more from it. In fact, my approach is actually striking a balance. I am cognizant of the fact that my subject is of interest to practitioners. I'm talking about those in the world of work, but also to academics and scholars. So while I'm taking a more practical approach, I'm also at the same time maintaining this scholarly integrity so as to engage and stimulate both a lay and scholarly individual who may be part of this audience tonight. So that then leads me to this question: who is this presentation for? It's for people whose work involve supporting others, such as people in helping professions like your doctors, your nurses, your teachers, members of the allied health profession, so many of them to name, social workers, managers, and employer managers, like company owners who are also involved in management of staff. So my main focus, my dimension, there's various dimensions to look at burnout. So mine is occupational burnout or workplace burnout. So, but also this is for anyone really who needing to gain some understanding on burnout. So back to our objectives. Objective number one: why talk about burnout? Why are we talking about burnout? Burnout does have a human cost. Burnout can happen to anybody. It can cause long-term stress, health problems, physical exhaustion, sleep deprivation, and disruptions to people's lives. It can also lead to isolation, where somebody becomes disengaged socially. And its effects can be long-lasting. May cause depression, and in some cases may cause other health problems that could lead to situations such as suicide. So, what is burnout? What does it mean to be burnt out? Which also raises other questions like, if I'm tired, if I'm exhausted, or if I'm under pressure with work, if all of those things are happening to me, am I necessarily burnt out? I think most of you would have heard or even used the term to be burnt out quite a lot. So let us go on a journey to explore what burnout is according to burnout literature. So what is burnout? In defining burnout, I'm indebted to two psychology scholars. One of them is Herbert Freudenberger, who lived 1926 to 1999. He was a German-born American psychologist who immensely contributed to our understanding and treatment of stress, chronic fatigue, and substance abuse or misuse, and early understandings of burnout. The other individual is Christina Maslach, who's a professor of psychology emerita, University of California in Berkeley, who works in the Healthy Workplace Center, and her focus is burnout on job stress. So her work is actually believed to have influenced the World Health Organization's definition of burnout, because only, I think, 2013 was burnout incorporated into the ICD, whereas researchers like Maslach, they've been defining it and talking about it and researching it with lots and lots of real-life evidence-based research outputs. Where did the term originate from? There is no one single suggestion. I've just picked up two suggestions here. One actually from Christina Maslach herself. She talks of in the 1960s, 70s, where there was a burnout shop. A burnout shop where the company owners, it's a startup kind of business that's actually starting up, and they're looking for people who come and work themselves to death. Obviously not in real life, but work so hard that by the time you are burnt out, when you've got nothing else to give, the business would have taken off. So it's understood that that could be one of the origins of what we call burnout today. But I mean, earliest scientific observations on burnout were carried out by the clinical psychologist Freudenberger. I've already alluded to his name, on young voluntary workers involved in supporting individuals with a history of substance misuse. So he concluded that a high proportion of these individuals, the ones who were supporting those who were in these conditions, that they will be subject to work-related depression after a few years. And there's also talk about that he said they will be burnt out. Okay. So, I mean, we know that scientific descriptions of burnout subsequently presented as the syndrome of psychiatric and physical breakdown. So psychiatry and physical breakdown. So Freudenberger and Maslach were researching, particularly in healthcare workers. I mean, there's vast majority of research in healthcare workers. There's research in almost every occupation now, but the vast majority is in healthcare workers. So I'm going to take you to the definition of burnout. We're going to define it. You know, like many concepts, there's no single definition. I will, however, draw from widely accepted definitions of burnout in literature to give a more general understanding of the phenomena that we describe as burnout. So don't expect to be an expert when you come out of this. It's just a general understanding. So both Freudenberger and Maslach, they consider that burnout was rooted in the caregiving service occupation. So that's where it all started from, where the core of the job is the relationship between a provider and a recipient. So they were referring to individual relational transactions in the workplace. So this is where they started from. So Maslach and Jackson's widely accepted three-dimensional conceptualization of burnout defines burnout as a syndrome which is characterized by three dimensions. So we are about to define it now. And what are those dimensions? Number one is emotional exhaustion. So where there is emotional exhaustion, that's being tired emotionally because of the work that involves working or helping other people. There's another dimension called depersonalization or cynicism. I will elaborate a bit on those. And there's also a reduced personal accomplishment in one's job. So three dimensions, they have to exist, obviously, under this theory, for us to say actually an individual is at the risk of, or they're actually burnt out. So what is emotional exhaustion? It's an experience of drain or being worn out, being empty. And obviously this is emotionally. The second one is depersonalization, which refers to a cynical negative attitude to one's work or towards the recipients of one's service. So the people you're supposed to be helping, then you become cynical towards them. As an example, teachers making cynical comments towards their students or pupils, whichever you want to use, and physicians to their patients, social workers to their clients, ministers and pastors to their congregants. So that's the second dimension, depersonalization or cynicism. And there's also reduced sense of personal accomplishment or competency in one's work, comparing to how they used to function before. So it's a diminishing of one's sense of accomplishment. So what are they saying? So according to this model, these three components, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment, they're actually interconnected. So according to this theory, emotional exhaustion, which we've just described, then leads to depersonalization, which subsequently lead to a lack of personal accomplishment. So somebody starts off with emotional exhaustion, and then they start becoming cynical or depersonalized to the same people, to the very people that they're supposed to be helping. And then consequently, they feel a lack of accomplishment, or they feel, I can't do this job. I can't do it any good. I'm not good at my job. So that kind of feeling. So those three interconnected domains. I mean, others have argued, I know for a fact, Professor Leslie Francis, a good friend of mine, he has argued that positive affect and negative affect are not opposite ends of a single continuum, but they are two separate continuum. So to that effect, Professor Leslie Francis, 2015, and others, they've argued that it is totally reasonable for an individual clergy, because their research is mainly clergy research, to simultaneously experience high levels of positive affect and high levels of negative affect. So their position is slightly different from Maslach et al., which I've just put out to you now. So in summary, what is burnout? So burnout is commonly described as a negative affect. Let me explain what affect means. Affect means feelings of emotional distress. So when we say negative affect, it's feelings of emotional distress. So let me go back to my summary. So burnout is described as a negative affect or feeling of emotional distress arising from work stressors. Burnout is by and large considered a work-related syndrome in caring professions and a consequence of ill-managed chronic stress in the workplace for people whose work involve working or helping other people. I hope that's not confusing. So burnout is by and large considered a workplace syndrome that arises due to chronic, long-term stress in the workplace that has not been managed well. Now, let me put a disclaimer there. I mean, there's other dimensions of burnout, and my presentation today is mainly about occupational burnout. I know that the three dimensions I've spoken about, there are some adaptations, particularly there's also theories about parental burnout, which is not what I'm talking about today, that has also adapted those three dimensions. But today I'm mainly focusing on burnout in the workplace. So I've got a beautiful definition. It's a little bit scientific, but I like this one by Brill in 1984. So burnout is dysfunctional state in an individual without major psychopathy. So without major psychopathy, who has, number one, functioned for a long time at adequate performance and affectual levels in the same job situation, who will not recover, obviously when things have gone down, to previous levels without outside help or some kind of environmental rearrangement. So although it's not classified as a disorder, burnout is recognized by the World Health Organization as a health problem. So WHO doesn't consider this as a disease, but it is a health problem. They consider it as a stress phenomenon in the workplace. So that's the predominant perspective of burnout. It's linked to the workplace. And that's also what the World Health Organization has followed those researchers who've been researching since the 1970s. I think it was only 2013 when it was included in the ICD. So, so according to the WHO, it's a response to chronic stressors in the workplace. So that's what burnout is, which has not been managed successfully. And according to the WHO, like other researchers who started researching this, it is characterized by exhaustion, cynicism, and professional inefficacy, which is exactly what Maslow and others have been saying for years. Now we want to look at the causes or stressors. So what are these things? The job conditions that are highly stressful and unhealthy. What are they? According to research, this is what has been coming out in research over the years. Number one is long hours, working long hours and high demands. So that's one of the causes. So these are some of the job conditions that are highly stressful and unhealthy. Long hours and high demands. The next one is job insecurity and a lack of control. Job insecurity, not secure in your job, always constantly thinking, am I going to lose this job? But also a lack of control where you can't control how you work. That's another cause or stressor for burnout, according to research. And also the third one is low social support. People do underestimate social support. It's very important. Social support is quite important outside of work or even within work itself. That social connection does have an impact. And then the fourth cause is work-family conflict. So work-life balance, if we could use that terminology. So I want to move on and talk about burnout, other burnout predictors for workplace stress. So these are based on work environment, and job and employee fit. So there's got to be a fit between an individual and their job and the environment in which they work. So these 6 areas may be useful in predicting burnout. Okay, so the more these happen, the more chances that somebody becomes burnout, and the less it happens. So it's that kind of effect. So what are these areas? It's workload, too much work, where there is too much work to do, a lack of resource to actually do that work. We're talking about in the UK, there's a shortage of 40,000 nurses in England. So you can imagine working in a nursing profession that there's obviously the workload, but also there isn't enough resource. I mean, you can take this and apply it in different other occupations. It's not just about healthcare or nursing. We talked about control already. It's one of those areas. Autonomy, the ability to make choices and decisions about your work. So the less you are able to do that, the more you're at risk of burnout. Another thing is reward. It's not necessarily about money. It's actually social reward and recognition at work. So those employers out there, we're talking about rewards and recognition. I mean, everybody loves recognition. It does help. It's part of our psychology. So reward does, if the absence of leads to the risk of burnout, but the presence of helps to actually move away from that. Also, workplace community. I mean, all this refers to all the people that you work with. If there's a good community at work, including the people you work with, people you work for, your bosses, your colleagues at work. If there's a good workplace community, it does help to mitigate burnout. And another thing, another area, all this is coming from research, fairness. Are the policies fair? The procedures, the practices, the culture in the workplace, is it fair for everybody? The lack of increases the risk of burnout, and the presence of obviously helps to move away from burnout. And the last thing, one of the 6 areas, the 6th one is values. Meaning, talking things like meaning, is it worthwhile at work? The passion, work motivation, how people value what they do. So these are the things that have come out in research that actually point whether we're going to be facing a risk of burnout or not. And there's also, I'm not going to get too much into it, there's personality factors and environmental factors. So outside of all of those things we've talked about, a number of studies have shown that the individual personality is a variable. Personality variable influences how different individuals respond to stress. So your personality it determines how you, because you can put 5 different people in exactly the same circumstances, but how they respond or how they are affected by stress is actually different. So there is that personality factor as well. There's also the environmental factors, places where people work. Now, how can we measure burnout? So there's quite a number of tools that can be used. I'm not going to go into detail because I'm more focusing on the Maslow theory. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. But I just want to acknowledge that there are various measuring tools. One of them is the Oldenburg Burnout Inventory, the OLBI. This one assesses two core dimensions, exhaustion and disengagement, obviously from work. This is more pertinent to measuring burnout in those workers who perform physical work or those whose job is primarily involves processing information. There's also the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory. It's yet another well-known tool for measuring burnout. It comprises of a questionnaire for burnout composed of 3 subscales. Personal burnout, it measures personal burnout. It also measures work-related burnout and client-related burnout. Immediately, I'm sure some of you can actually see how it can be problematic for some occupations. As an example, Christian ministers or pastors or priests, it's quite difficult to differentiate between work-related burnout and client-related burnout for them. I'm sure that would apply to other occupations as well. And the last one I'm going to cite is the FBI, the Francis Burnout Inventory. This is a tool by a colleague, Professor Leslie Francis, who has done lots of research over the decades on clergy burnout, those involved in Christian ministry. So he has come up with the Francis Burnout Inventory, the FBI. The FBI negative affect is assessed by the scale of emotional exhaustion in ministry. So that's quite specific, because what he's come up with, which I agree with, obviously, is that when you look at Christian ministry, there's other elements that might not apply to other roles. So this one is specifically designed for ministry. Now I'm going to center on the MBI, the Maslow Burnout Inventory, which is the basis of my definition and obviously my presentation today. We've already looked at the 3 dimensions: exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy, or emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and lack of personal accomplishment. Exactly the same thing. So this tool is a range of questions that asks you how often you feel a certain way, and you respond. Actually, I think there's a free version online. Just Google MBI, Maslow Burnout Inventory. It's quite useful just to play around with it and see what it could say for you. But if you're really serious about it, it's advisable to actually purchase, because it comes with instructions. Like if you are an organization, you want to dispense it to your employees. If you don't know how to use it, it does have a manual. I mean, I've used it quite a lot of times in research. So the MBI, Maslow Burnout Inventory, asks you how you feel a certain way. It gives you those questions. Do you feel such and such? So you respond by how often you feel that way. And the results are generated, and there is a possible 5 outcomes from the result. So there's where you have 3 high negative scores. As an example, somebody's high on emotional exhaustion, they're high on depersonalization, they are high on feeling of a lack of personal accomplishment, then it indicates that this individual is burnt out or at very high risk of burnout. Then where one has one high score, like cynicism, right? It means that they are disengaged. So one high negative score, if it is on cynicism, then is described as a disengaged type or individual. Where there's one high score, which is exhaustion, by itself. This is quite common with actually doctors in the US. Lots and lots of research constantly. Doctors in the US, there is a phenomenon or a tendency of the outcomes of the research that they usually score particularly high on the exhaustion, and that shows those who are overextended. So it's an overextended group or individual if it's one person. And then if the one high score is on feeling of lack of personal accomplishment, it's called it comes out as an ineffective individual or group of people if it's a group of people who are scoring that way. And if there's no negative score, it's all positive, you're not feeling emotionally exhausted, you're not feeling depersonalized, you're not feeling a lack of personal accomplishment, it comes out and reported as engaged. So 5 areas: there's a burnt out group, disengaged, overextended, ineffective, and the engaged. So now we're going to move on at the remedy. Okay, how can we remedy burnout? I'm going to read a quote here from Herbert Freudenberger on staff burnout in the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse, encompassing all addictive disorders. This is actually from 1976. I like what Freudenberger said. He says, "I'm never impressed when a staff member says, 'I don't see my friends anymore because, I'm working too hard.' He says, 'As far as I'm concerned, sign 1 of potential burnout is that.' Because if you've given up outside life, your outside activity, your outside friendship patterns, you are in trouble, right?" So it's just a quote to start us off in this section where I'm talking about how can we remedy, how can we mitigate burnout. So according to Maslow, fitting a person to a job does help reduce burnout. So there are things like training and education. So people getting trained up, educated, develop their skills, practical experience. So that's one of the things that can be done to fit someone to a job. Also helping people cope with stress, resilience, like taking time away from work. I looked at this also from when I in one of my publication on burnout in clergy, in people who are Christian ministers. Rest did come out as one of the ways we could mitigate we could mitigate burnout. So fitting people to a job, training, education, developing skills, practical experience, but also helping coping with stress, so resilience, training on resilience, but also taking time away, rest, breaks, and things like that. But also fitting the job to people, right? So we talked about fitting someone to a job, but also fitting the job to people. What does that mean? It means to modify the working conditions that bring negative outcomes. So it's actually modifying the job itself, rather than focusing on the individual or individuals. So there's 2 ways to do it. What are we talking about? We're talking about physical environments can be adjusted. We can talk about adjusting workplace culture. So if there's a culture of some of the things we've talked about which are not good, then you can actually invest in work doing that to try and resolve those cultures and remedy them such that the workplace itself is made suitable for working. Okay, so we want to look at it's a little bit like a reverse, because obviously we looked at the things that cause stressors in the workplace, but I want to now look at them from a opposite perspective, as I'm about to finish now. So psychological needs, motivation, commitment, and innovation. So if workplace promotes these things, we get a healthier workplace. That's actually quoting from Maslow. So what are those things? She identifies 7 things from the research, lots of research that she's done over the years in different disciplines. Number 1 is autonomy. The more someone is autonomous in their work, they, as we said before, they determine what they do in their workplace. They have a little bit more control. Then that helps to mitigate burnout. Second one is a sense of belongingness. If you feel you belong to the workplace, we talked about those, a community in the workplace. If there is belongingness, it does help. Researchers prove that people who are in that state of feeling, there is lesser risk of burnout than if it was the opposite. And then the third thing is competence. Obviously, you need to be able to do your job. The more someone feels competent, or actually when they are competent in their job, there's little pressure, they are able to do their job, then that helps. So competency, again, where there's positive emotions within the individual or within a workplace, that actually helps with mitigating burnout. Point number 5, psychological safety, where people are at ease when they're in their mind and not constantly worried about things, about work itself. We talked about job security before. These are some of the ways that we can mitigate. So I'm going to move on to point number 6. We talked about fairness. Where there's fairness in the workplace, it does stimulate better working conditions, and it also limits the risk of burnout. And we talked about the last thing, which is number 7, where people have got sense of purpose in what they're doing. When there's meaning to it, it does help. So I've come to the end of my presentation today. We talked about the 5 objectives that we set out to look at. Obviously, the first one is to try and the first one was to say, why do we need to talk about burnout? So we've gone through that. And the reason is that because it is important, there is a human cost to it. And then we went on to define burnout. And in summary, what we said was that burnout is considered, by and large, it is described as a negative effect or feeling of emotional distress arising from work stress. Okay. And by and large, as we've said, it's considered a work-related syndrome in people whose work involve helping other people. We've made reference to the World Health Organization, that they also classified as a response to chronic stress in the workplace, and which have not been managed successfully, which then lead to exhaustion, cynicism, and professional inefficacy. We looked at some of the causes, the stressors: long hours and high demands, job insecurity, lack of control, low social support, and work-life conflict, we said. We looked at the 6 areas: workload, too much work, lack of resource. We looked at control, lack of autonomy, not being able to make decisions about your work. We also talked about the lack of reward, not necessarily financial reward. And we talked about the community, workplace community, that it does promote good well-being. And then we talked about fairness, policies, procedures, and practices, or even culture that contrary to that. And then finally, we looked at values, that there has to be some kind of meaning. It has to be fostered in the work itself. It has to be worthwhile. People have to have passion. People need to have motivation about doing their work. So we also said in the midst of all those things, there's also personality factors. And we could possibly do a presentation that's specifically on that, because there's quite a lot we could cover on that. And this concludes my presentation on workplace burnout. I know there's a lot of information to take in, and one might be left wondering how they can actually use all of this information in a real life work or business setting to help yourself or those that work with and for you to remain engaged and to be effective in the work that they do. Well, my team of business consultants and business coaches and myself, we are here to help you as an individual, but also as an organization. We do work with individuals. We work with organizations to help you identify risk factors within your own work environment, identify behaviors that actually place you or those that are in your workplace at a heightened risk of burnout. And we work with you to produce some bespoke programs that will help people become more engaged with work, with lower the risks of burnout, and you actually get the best out of yourself and those that work with you. So if you want to engage with us and just try and find out how we can help you, you can get in touch with me through my website, which is at the bottom there, or drop me an email, hartness@veracityhealthcare.org. It could be from anywhere around the world. We do work with people from different countries. So from me tonight, thank you all for joining, and do keep in touch and look out. There might be something else coming. Have a good evening.